Stephen Koukoulas, welcome, mate.
Mark, great to be back. What a month we've had in between.
It's crazy. And by the way, the media's doing the RBA's job for them in a big way.
Yes.
Last time you and I met, we met before the last Reserve Bank meeting, which was in the month of July. Of course, they went up 50 basis points. We both sort of thought around about that number was going to be the number, right?
Yep.
So we're okay. But why don't we just quickly reflect on what is the net effect so far on clearance rates, property prices, as a result of what's happened so far. Not let's not look into the future, but as a result of what's happened so far. So clearance rates, where do we see the
They
clearance
have
rate?
fallen prior to the rate hiking cycle commencing. They are in the 70s, 75, sometimes 80%, depending on the weekend or the city that you're looking at.
Yep.
Now they're in the 50s in all the major cities.
Yep.
So there's been a pretty big fall. So if you take your house to auction, there's only a 50% chance you're going to sell it at auction at the moment. And probably that is actually overstating the auction clearance rates, because some people pull their houses if they know they've got no registered bidders. So auction clearance rates are saying to me that it is a buyer's market. Sellers put their place on the market hoping that they get a good price. If they don't, it generally gets passed in and the negotiations start.
If the clearance rates are 50%, that is 55% or whatever it is, 55% of all those properties are put on the market on any particular day for auction, as opposed to all those that were listed for auction but get withdrawn. But 50% of all those that get put on any one day, on a Saturday, for example, up for auction, only 55% of those are clearing. In other words, are sold, which doesn't include those that are sold post-auction. Okay, it doesn't include those.
And if they're sold prior to the auction, they're taken off the market too. In fact, I'm sure my sister won't mind me saying, her next door neighbour had a place that was on the market on for auction, sold 10 days prior to the auction.
So it doesn't include those. So it's not. It's sort of a bit of a fallible number, but it's got some vulnerabilities. But there is some correlation, I guess, to house prices eventually. But what it could also mean is that vendors are saying, well, I don't need to sell, and I'm not going to get my price, so I'm going to pull out.
And that's a really important thing from what we're hearing. In fact, just this morning on the radio, I heard the NAB CEO. Mr. McEwen giving a talk about what an NAB's seeing. They're pretty big. They're saying with no sign of distress selling. So your point is that people put their house on the market. Maybe it's a bit of a wing and a prayer. Gee, I hope I get this price for it. Doesn't sell. They think, oh, well, look, I'll hold tight until the market turns around again. So there's that aspect too. And there is a pretty good correlation between the auction clearance rates and then what happens to prices. So buyers are sort of stepping back thinking, gee, I won't go quite as high. Vendors haven't yet adjusted their price expectations lower, or not much anyway. So we've got this bit of a standoff between buyers and sellers.
No willing buyer, no willing seller. There's a willing buyer, but not a willing seller.
Correct, and at that price.
Yeah, and that's the definition of a market. So
correct,
and because you need the
be it houses or
anything,
widgets.
It doesn't matter.
Yep.
So we have a so-called dysfunction at the moment. Vendors don't need to sell. They're not, and those who are selling are people who genuinely want to sell now because they've got another place to buy, or they're going to retire, they're getting divorced, just your normal business as usual shit. So there's no real. So I don't think the auction clearance rates necessarily indicate to me that there's a major problem.
Correct. No, they don't. No, I wouldn't put my money on auction clearance rates being the perfect predictor of what's happening in housing. Correct.
But there is, over time, there has been some correlation between auction clearance rates. Definitely when auction clearance rates are 85%, it's around the other way.
There's an unambiguous boom.
Yeah.
And possibly when they're down at 20% or 30%, which I don't think has happened all that often, to be frank, you probably think, gee, the market's really weak. When it's 50, 60, thereabouts, there's still people buying houses. It's not like everyone's stepped away.
Correct. And they're just paying less. So
correct.
So then if we look at CoreLogic have broken the Australian housing market up into 3,085 subsections. In other words, there might be one for Chatswood and one for another area in South Sydney. So anyway, they've got 3,085 arbitrary sections. And they're saying last quarter, there was a 26% of those had a reduction in house prices or dwelling prices. It includes units and houses. They're saying right now it's 41%. In other words, there has been a nearly doubling of those sections of the Australian housing market that have fallen in price. So that's probably not a bad indicator. That's not a bad indicator for us. We haven't seen that for a long time.
No, it is an indicator. And again, there's no guide on how big the falls are. It might just be down 1%.
Yeah.
And remembering that late last year, early this year, we had a 25% approximately increase in house prices from pre-COVID to that time. Prices had boomed. So in a funny way, when you see these sort of things happen, after such a boom, a little bit of a pullback's actually natural. It's not even linked to RBA interest rates. When a house goes from, say, $1 million to 1.25 million, and then someone tries to sell it and it goes for 1.225, well, it's hardly a problem or a concern.
Again, not a real necessarily an indicator, but it has some relevance. But what it definitely tells us the boom is over.
Oh, there's no question about that. Yes.
So both of these things so far tell the
Correct.
auction clearance rates and the 41% reduction of 3,085 subsections of housing in Australia reduction both indicate that the boom is over. But it's not. We shouldn't be saying death to the property market because that's
boom doesn't then go to bust.
Correct.
It can go to what we call a soft landing.
Yeah, which
Down
is
a
where
bit.
the RBA would like to put us.
Indeed, and I think from what Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, is outlining in his economic statement is, the economy's slowing, but recession, no.
Right.
Unlikely. Never say never, but unlikely.